I never believed in second chances. Not out here, where the wind carves your name into stone, and winter don't ask twice before it takes. But the night Rachel knocked on Sam Morgan's door with 3 starving children, no husband, and eyes too proud to beg something changed. Not just the weather, but the air itself. You could feel it, like the prairie holding its breath. See, folks like Sam, they don't fall in love. Not again, not after burying a woman like Abigail. But what do you do when love don't knock polite? What do you do when it shows up wrapped in a ragged quilt, carrying a doll and the weight of survival? That cabin wasn't meant to hold 5 hearts. Hell, it barely held 1. But sometimes, the West don't care what you're ready for. It just gives, brutally, beautifully. And if you've got the grit to stay through the storm, you might just earn something worth keeping. What would you do if the one thing you swore you'd never open your heart to again showed up on your doorstep, half frozen and holding a child? Have you ever seen a love story unfold not with a kiss, but with a bowl of broth and a second quilt? Let me know down below. Would you let them in? Or bolt the door tighter? The Montana winter had long since sunk its teeth into the high country, and Sam Morgan, he'd burrowed in with it, same as he'd done for the 5 years since Abigail had been laid to rest. His cabin, once a testament to shared laughter and the scent of baking bread, now stood as a monument to silence. Dust, thick as a shroud, lay heavy on Abigail's rocker, on the mantel where their wedding portrait used to sit before he'd tucked it away in the big cedar chest. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a cold, hollow ache that had settled deep in Sam's bones, a chill that no fire in the hearth could ever quite reach. He moved through the days like a ghost in his own life, the solitude, a familiar, if unwelcome, companion. Outside, the wind, a banshee wail, clawed at the logs of the cabin, driving snow into drifts that climbed halfway up the shuttered windows. Sam had seen his share of blizzards in 60-odd years, but this one had a particular fury, as if nature itself were trying to scour the world clean. Or perhaps bury it? He'd just finished his meager supper, jerky and a day-old biscuit, swallowed without taste, and was staring into the fire, the flames doing little to dispel the gloom that clung to the corners of the room and the deeper corners of his heart, when the sound came. Knock, 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 faint, almost swallowed by the storm's roar, but unmistakable. Sam froze. A knock. Out here, miles from any real road, in a blizzard that had been raging for 2 days straight. His hand instinctively went to the old Colt peacemaker he kept on the mantel, its wood worn smooth by his touch over the years. Folks didn't just happen by in this kind of weather. Not in this part of the territory. More often than not, unexpected company meant trouble. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots making little sound on the worn floorboards. "Who's out there?" he called, his voice raspy from disuse, rougher than the wind itself. A woman's voice, thin and strained, carried back. "Please, help. We're lost." Sam hesitated. The voice was female, laced with an exhaustion that felt bone deep. That meant more than one. He wasn't a man given to rash decisions. Not anymore. Abigail had been the one with the open heart, the welcoming smile for any soul in need. He'd grown harder since she'd gone, or maybe just emptier. But the wind howled again, a brutal, uncaring sound, and he thought of what it would mean to be caught out in that, with no shelter in sight. He drew the bolt, the metal scraping loud in the sudden lull of the storm, and pulled the heavy door inward a crack. The wind tore at it, flinging icy crystals into his face. And there she stood, or rather, sagged. A woman, her face pale as the snow itself, framed by a thin, threadbare shawl pulled tight, her eyes, wide and dark in the flickering lamplight that spilled from the cabin, held a desperation so profound It struck Sam harder than the cold. Clustered around her, like frightened chicks, were 3 small children, their faces pinched, their bodies trembling visibly beneath inadequate clothing. The smallest, a babe in arms, was whimpering, a pitiful sound almost lost to the elements. She didn't plead, didn't beg, just stood there, the very picture of spent hope. Her gaze locked on his. We saw your light," she managed, her breath misting in the frigid air. Sam looked at the children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a faint, dawning hope. He saw the chapped lips of the boy, no older than 9, trying to stand brave. He saw the girl, maybe 6, hiding her face in her mother's skirt. Abigail would have had them inside before the first word was out. The thought was a sharp pang, a familiar ache. He stepped back, pulling the door wider. "Get in," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "All of you, before you freeze solid." It was as if a dam had broken. The woman, Rachel, as he would soon learn her name to be, nearly stumbled across the threshold, the children spilling in after her like a tide. They brought with them the biting cold of the storm, the smell of wet wool and fear, but also something else, a presence, a stirring in the stagnant air of the cabin. It was the first real breath, it seemed to Sam, that had been drawn within those walls in 5 long years. The first small flicker to touch that cold, dormant ember deep inside him. The cabin, small as it was, seemed to shrink further with their arrival. Yet somehow, the oppressive silence receded a fraction. The youngest child, a girl bundled tight, began to cry in earnest now, a raw, hungry sound. The boy, teeth chattering, looked around with wide, assessing eyes, while the older girl clung to her mother's leg, burying her face. Rachel swayed, her hand going to the doorframe for support. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We didn't know where else." Sam just grunted, already turning towards the stove. "There's stew from noon," he said, not looking at them directly. "It was easier that way. Not much, but it's hot." He ladled the thick, meaty broth into the tin bowls Abigail had favored, his movement stiff but efficient. The silence settled again, but it was different now, punctuated by the children's sniffles and the clink of spoon against bowl. He set the bowls on the rough-hewn table. "Eat." Rachel guided the children, her hands trembling as she helped the little girl, then took a bowl for herself. They ate like starving wolves, yet with a quiet desperation that tore at something inside Sam. He'd thought long dead. He watched them, not wanting to, but unable to look away. The firelight caught the hollows in Rachel's cheeks. The weariness etched around her eyes. She wasn't old. He reckoned, maybe early 30s, but life had clearly dealt her a hard hand. When the bowls were empty, a fragile warmth began to spread from the stove, pushing back the immediate chill. The children, their bellies full for the first time in what looked like days, were starting to droop, their fear giving way to exhaustion. Sam cleared his throat. Roads'll be snowed in for a spell. Days, maybe longer. Way this storm's carrying on. He paused, the words feeling foreign on his tongue after so much silence. You all can stay, till the way is clear." Rachel looked up, her eyes, dark and deep, meeting his. There was gratitude there, stark and overwhelming, but something else too. A wariness, a question. "We don't want to be a burden." "Mr. Morgan." "Sam Morgan." "Rachel Miller. And these are Ethan, Lily, and little Rose." She gestured to the boy, then the girl, then the sleeping babe she now cradled protectively. "We can't pay you much. We don't have." Sam waved a dismissive hand. "Ain't asked for pay." He looked towards the small loft, then at the narrow cot in the corner. "Boy can take the loft. You and the girls can have the cot. I'll make do by the fire." It wasn't ideal, but it was shelter. It was warmth. Later, after the children were settled, cocooned in an odd assortment of his old blankets and a spare buffalo robe, a quiet descended once more, but this quiet was filled with the soft breathing of the children, a sound so alien to the cabin it was almost jarring. Rachel sat by the hearth, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring into the dying embers. The storm still raged outside, but its fury felt somewhat distant now, held at bay by the stout log walls and the fragile peace within. Sam poured 2 mugs of watered-down coffee. Handing one to her, she took it with a murmured thanks. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken things. "Your husband?" Sam finally asked, keeping his voice low. "Matter of fact, he with you." Rachel flinched, almost imperceptibly, her gaze dropping to the chipped mug in her hands. When she spoke, her voice was flat, devoid of inflection, as if reciting a story learned by rote, a story that had drained all emotion from her. "Randall," she said, the name a stone in her mouth. He was with us. We were heading west, Oregon," he said. "A new start." She took a shaky breath. "Day before yesterday, when the snow started getting real bad, up in the pass. He said the wagon was too slow, too heavy with us in it." Her fingers tightened on the mug. "He took the best horse, most of the supplies, said he'd send for us once he got settled, or found a town, just rode off, left us with the tired mare and not much else." Sam stared into the fire, the orange light dancing in his eyes, but he saw nothing of the flames. He felt a cold anger settle in his gut, a disdain for the man. Randall, that was sharp and immediate. To abandon a woman and her young in the teeth of a Montana winter, it was a coward's act, a cruel one. He thought of Abigail, of her fierce loyalty, her unwavering strength. No man worth his salt would do such a thing. He said nothing for a long moment, just the crackle of the fire and the relentless moan of the wind filling the space between them. He wouldn't offer platitudes, wouldn't voice the condemnation that simmered inside him. She didn't need his pity. What she needed was shelter, and right now, that was something he could give. He looked at her then, at the slumped shoulders, the exhaustion that seemed to radiate from her. "Well," he said, his voice still gruff, but perhaps a shade less so. "You're safe here now. Ms. Miller, you and the little ones. We'll see what the morning brings." She nodded. A single, small movement. Her eyes met his again, and this time, beneath the weariness and the lingering fear, Sam thought he saw a flicker of something else. Not hope, not yet, but a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the storm they were all weathering, both outside the cabin and within. The first breath of change had indeed entered Sam Morgan's frozen world, carried in on the storm, ushered in by a desperate knock, and embodied by a woman and 3 small children who had nowhere else to turn. The long, lonely winter was far from over, but for the first time in a very long time, the silence in Sam's cabin felt a little less absolute. The morning brought a world transformed, buried under a silent, pristine blanket of white. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a sky so clear and blue it hurt the eyes. But the drifts were immense, the paths obliterated. Sam, looking out, knew it would be days, maybe a full week, before anyone could get through to the main trails, let alone the rutted track that led to his remote cabin. "Reckon you're stuck here a while longer. Ms. Miller," he stated, more an observation than an invitation, though the harshness had softened from his tone, just a touch. Rachel, who had risen early and somehow managed to coax a hesitant warmth from the stove for coffee, nodded. "I figured as much. Mr. Morgan." A quiet understanding passed between them. There was no talk of imposing, no apologies. The frontier had a way of dictating terms, and survival often meant accepting help when offered, offering it when needed. And so, The days settled into a new rhythm. Unfamiliar, yet not entirely unwelcome. Rachel, it turned out, had a quiet efficiency about her. Slowly, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, she began to tend to the cabin, not as a guest, but as someone making a temporary home habitable. The dust that had been Abigail's companion in memory began to recede under Rachel's diligent cloth. The scent of baking, simple biscuits, a meager cornbread conjured from Sam's limited supplies, started to mingle with the wood smoke, chasing away the stale air of disuse. It was a scent Sam hadn't realized he'd missed so profoundly, a ghost of Abigail's kitchen. The children, thawing like the landscape outside, brought a hesitant life back to the silent cabin. Ethan, grave and watchful at first, soon appointed himself Sam's shadow when the older man ventured out to check his snares or clear a path to the woodshed. He'd ask quiet questions about tracking, about the way the snow settled on the pines. Lily, with her wide, curious eyes, discovered a stub of charcoal and old shipping manifests Sam had kept. And soon, the cabin floorboards near the hearth became her canvas, filled with lopsided animals and beaming suns. Even baby Rose, her initial fretfulness soothed by regular meals and the surprising warmth of the cabin, would gurgle happily from her nest of blankets, her gaze following Lily's energetic movements. One afternoon, as a pale sun slanted through the newly cleaned window pane, Lily brought Sam a drawing. "This is you," she announced, pointing to a tall, somewhat lopsided figure with a hat. "And this is Mama, and Ethan, and Rose, and this," she pointed to a smaller figure beside Sam's, "is me, helpin' you with the wood." Sam looked down at the childish scrawl, a peculiar tightness in his chest. He hadn't been helped with anything in a very long time. He just grunted, but his rough fingers were surprisingly gentle as he took the drawing. "Good work, little one." He found himself, one evening, with his old whittling knife in hand. He hadn't carved much since Abigail passed. The joy had gone out of it, the shapes in the wood too often mirroring the emptiness in his heart. But now, watching Ethan's serious face as he tried to mend a broken toy soldier Rachel had fashioned from twigs, Sam felt a different urge. He picked up a piece of seasoned pine. His hands, stiff at first, soon rediscovered their old cunning. He wasn't carving to forget his pain this time. He was carving a small, sturdy horse for the boy, a doll with jointed limbs for Lily. It was Ethan, a few days later, who delivered the quiet shock. Sam was showing him how to properly stack firewood in the lean-to, the crisp air biting at their cheeks. Ethan, struggling with a piece of wood almost too big for him, grunted with effort. "Got it, Papa Sam," he said, then froze, his eyes widening as he realized what he'd uttered. Sam stopped, the axe in his hand suddenly heavy. Papa Sam. The word echoed in the silent, snow-filled clearing. It had been a lifetime since anyone had called him anything close to that. A wave of something unfamiliar. Surprise, a strange warmth, a sharper pang of loss for what had been and what could never be, washed over him. He looked at Ethan, who seemed braced for a reprimand. Sam cleared his throat, the sound rough. He didn't correct the boy. He didn't acknowledge it directly either. He just nodded towards the woodpile. "Stack it square. Son, keeps the damp out." But as they worked, the word lingered in the air, a fragile new thing in the vastness of the Montana winter. He didn't reject it. He couldn't. The tentative peace, however, was a delicate thing. Rachel, while hardworking and grateful, maintained a certain distance, a careful reserve that Sam, in his own solitary way, understood. He saw the shadows in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the way she'd sometimes flinch if he moved too suddenly near her or the children. One evening, long after the little ones were asleep, lulled by a story Sam had reluctantly recounted about a brave coyote outsmarting a bear, a tale from his own boyhood, Rachel spoke. her voice barely above a whisper. They were sitting by the fire, the only light in the cabin. "Mr. Morgan," she began, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "There's something you should know. About Randall." Sam waited, saying nothing, sensing the weight of her words. "It wasn't just that he left us," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. Before Rose was born, there was another, a baby. I lost it." She paused, and the silence was heavy with her pain. It was Randall. He had a temper, especially when he drank. Sam's jaw tightened. The image of this small, weary woman enduring such brutality sent a cold fury through him, deeper and sharper than his contempt for Randall's abandonment. "That's why." She finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a raw, haunted honesty. "That's why I find it hard trusting men, any closeness." Her gaze flickered away. "You've been good to us, Mr. Morgan, kinder than we had any right to expect. But I wanted you to understand. The fear, it doesn't just go away." He sat there for a long moment, the fire crackling, the weight of her confession settling between them. He thought of Abigail's gentle strength, her unwavering belief in the good of people. He wasn't Abigail. He was a man who knew the harshness of the world, the cruelty humans were capable of. "No, ma'am," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "A thing like that don't just go away, and no man has the right." It wasn't absolution, nor was it pity. It was a simple statement of fact, an acknowledgement of her truth, and in its own way, it was a form of respect. As the snows began to melt and the distant possibility of travel returned, word of Sam Morgan's unexpected houseguests eventually trickled down to the small settlement of Redemption. A good day's ride in fair weather. One crisp morning, Martha Webb, a sturdy widow who ran the town's general store and post office, made the trek up, ostensibly to check on Sam, but mostly, he suspected, out of curiosity. Mrs. Webb, a woman whose heart was as ample as her frame, took one look at Rachel's tired face, the children's mended clothes, and the new, subtle order in Sam's cabin, and her initial suspicion softened. She stayed for coffee, asked gentle questions, and before she left, she offered Rachel some part-time work at the store, just a few hours. When you can manage it, child, helping with inventory, minding the counter, could use the hand, and you could use the coin. I imagine, Rachel, a flush of surprise and gratitude on her face, accepted. It was a lifeline, a chance to contribute, to regain a piece of her independence. She proved to be a quick learner, her quiet dignity and gentle manner with customers soon winning over the initially wary townsfolk. Watching her return from Redemption one evening, her shoulders a little straighter, a small bag of provisions clutched in her hand, bought with her own earnings, Sam felt another shift within him. This wasn't just about providing temporary shelter anymore. These people, this woman and her children, had woven themselves into the fabric of his quiet existence, disturbing the lonely patterns of his grief in ways he hadn't anticipated. That night, as Rachel was banking the fire, Sam spoke, the words carefully chosen, though they felt momentous hanging in the air. "Ms. Miller," he began, looking not at her, but at the worn floorboards. "This cabin, it's small, but it's sturdy, and there's land more than one man needs." He paused, then finally met her gaze. "Weather's breaking. Roads will be clear soon enough, but there's no need for you and the children to move on. If you've a mind to stay." It wasn't a proposal of marriage, not in the traditional sense. It was an offer of permanence, of a shared roof, a shared life. However undefined, it was as much as a man like Sam Morgan could offer, couched in the practical terms of the frontier. Rachel stood very still, the poker still in her hand. The firelight cast flickering shadows on her face, making it impossible to read her expression. She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the sigh of the wind outside. A gentler sound now than it had been weeks before. But as she finally turned, her eyes met his, and in their depths, Sam saw not the fear that had once been so prominent, but a thoughtful, weighing look. He saw the dawning realization that this quiet, gruff man was offering not just a refuge from the storm, but perhaps a place to anchor her battered heart. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And for the first time, when she looked at Sam Morgan and the rugged cabin that had become their unlikely sanctuary, she wasn't just seeing a temporary shelter. She was seeing a place where, just maybe, hope could lay down roots and begin, tentatively, to grow, spring, when it finally fought its way into the Montana high country, did so with a painter's gentle hand. The harsh whites of winter grudgingly gave way to the tender greens of new grass, and the icy silence of the streams turned into a boisterous chuckle as they hurried over newly freed stones. With the thaw came the scent of damp earth and pine, a promise of renewal that settled tentatively in Rachel Miller's heart. Sam Morgan's quiet offer, no need to move on, if you've a mind to stay, had echoed in her thoughts through those changing weeks. She hadn't given him an answer, not in words, but her hands had continued their work, coaxing a small patch of ground near the cabin into a hopeful garden. And the children's laughter, now less hesitant, had become a familiar sound, weaving itself into the rustle of the aspen leaves. The fragile peace, however, was as tenuous as the early spring sunshine. He arrived on a day when the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, a day that felt too beautiful for bad tidings. Randall, he rode in, not on a tired mare, but a sleek, well-fed gelding, his clothes newer, his demeanor radiating a smug confidence that set Sam's teeth on edge from the moment he saw him approach the clearing. Rachel was inside with Rose, the older children playing a complicated game with pebbles near the woodshed. Sam was mending a harness strap on the porch, the familiar work a comfort in his hands. Randall reined in, his eyes, cold and assessing, sweeping over the cabin, lingering on the signs of occupancy. The neatly stacked firewood, the small flower Ethan had proudly planted in a rusty can. Well, Randall said, his voice carrying an oily assurance. Found yourselves a cozy little nest. Did you, Rachel? Rachel appeared in the doorway, her face paling, her hand instinctively going to the doorframe as if for support. The children, sensing the sudden tension, fell silent, Ethan moving to stand protectively, if futilely, in front of Lily. Randall, Rachel's voice was barely a whisper, expected a warmer welcome. Wife, he sneered, dismounting with a flourish. Come to take you and my young'uns home. Sam rose slowly, placing the harness aside. She ain't your wife no more than this is your home. Randall, Sam stated, his voice low and flat, but with an undercurrent of granite. Randall's gaze shifted to Sam, a flicker of contempt in his eyes. Stay out of this, old man. This is family business. He turned back to Rachel. I got rights. They're my children, and I aim to have them back. The law says so. He patted a breast pocket. Got the papers right here, signed by a circuit judge down in Helena. Says I get custody. Fear, stark and cold, flashed in Rachel's eyes. She'd known this was possible, had dreaded it. But the reality of his presence, his confident assertion of rights he'd forfeited through cruelty and abandonment, was a blow. You abandoned them, Sam said, stepping forward slightly. Left them for dead in a blizzard. Proved they're resilient. Didn't it? Randall retorted, unperturbed. And a father has a right to discipline, to make decisions for his family's welfare. The judge seemed to think my reasons for travel in light were sound enough. He smirked. Pack their things. Rachel, we're leaving. They're not going anywhere with you, Rachel said, her voice trembling but firm, finding a strength she hadn't known she possessed. True to his threat. 2 days later, Randall returned, and not alone. Sheriff Brody, a man Sam knew to be fair but bound by the letter of the law, rode with him, his face grim. Randall, smugly, held out a fresh set of papers. "Sam, Rachel," Brody began, his voice uncomfortable. "This here is a court order. Says Mr. Miller has temporary custody pending a full hearing. I don't like it much more'n you do, but it's a judge's signature." But redemption, small as it was, had a long memory and a strong sense of justice. As if summoned by an unseen signal, figures began to emerge from the tree line. Mrs. Webb, her arms crossed, her expression formidable. Doc Hadley, his medical bag in hand, looking more like a stern schoolmaster than a physician. Even Pastor Elias, his Bible clutched in his hand, his gentle face set in lines of disapproval. They didn't speak, just stood there, a silent, unwavering wall of support behind Rachel and Sam. Sheriff Brody looked from the stoic townsfolk to Randall's impatient scowl, then back to the order in his hand. He was a man caught. "Randall," he said slowly, "these folks, they seem to have a different opinion of your character and fitness as a father, and Mrs. Miller has a right to contest this. This order, it's for temporary custody until a proper hearing." He lowered the paper. "Given the circumstances and the local sentiment, I'd advise you to wait for that full hearing. Forcing the issue now, with these good people as witnesses to any distress caused to the children." He let the sentence hang. Randall's face contorted with fury. "This ain't over. Brody, I'll be back with a federal marshal if I have to. Those are my children." He glared at Rachel. "You'll pay for this." He wheeled his horse and galloped off, leaving a trail of impotent rage. The sheriff sighed, tipping his hat to Rachel. "He'll be back. Ma'am, likely with a date for that hearing. You should consider getting legal counsel." He then nodded to Sam and the others and rode away, the immediate crisis averted, but a larger one looming. That night, the cabin felt like a fortress under siege. Sam knew Randall. A man like that, thwarted and humiliated, was dangerous. He didn't sleep, sitting by the window, watching the moonlit clearing. Just as the first hint of dawn touched the sky, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the woods. Randall, he moved stealthily towards the cabin, a rifle glinting in his hand. Sam was on his feet in an instant. His own Colt was on the mantel. Too far. No time. He moved to the door, unbolting it silently. As Randall reached the porch steps, Sam threw the door open, looking for something. "Randall!" Sam's voice was quiet, but it cut through the pre-dawn stillness. Randall, startled, raised his rifle. "Get out of my way, old man. This ain't your way," Sam said, holding Randall's gaze, his body positioned to block the doorway. He knew he was vulnerable, knew the rifle could end it in a second, but he also knew Rachel was behind him, stirring at the sounds. "Rachel," he called, never taking his eyes off Randall. "The back way. Now, take the children." He heard the quiet scrape of the back door. Randall's eyes flickered, his attention momentarily divided. It was all Sam needed. He lunged, not for the rifle, but for Randall himself, a lifetime of hard work giving his aging frame surprising strength. They crashed to the porch, the rifle clattering away. The struggle was brief, brutal. Sam was older, but desperation and a cold, protective rage fueled him. He landed one solid punch to Randall's jaw, and the man went limp for a moment. Stunned, Sam scrambled back, his breath coming in harsh gasps, as Randall, cursing, retrieved his rifle and staggered away into the woods. Defeated for now, but still a threat. When Rachel returned, her face ashen, the children bewildered but safe, Sam was already retrieving his old double-barreled shotgun from the dusty oilcloth it had been wrapped in for years. The encounter had been too close. "He'll be back," Sam said, his voice grim as he checked the firing pins. and the law might take its sweet time. He looked at Rachel. You need to know how to use this, not just for Randall. For anything? He took her out to the edge of the clearing the next day. The shotgun was heavy, cold in her hands. He showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to brace for the recoil. Her hands trembled. The thought of wielding such power, such potential for violence, was alien to her. I can't, Sam, she whispered, her eyes wide. You can, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. You got 3 reasons right there in that cabin why you can. A few days later, a ragged-looking drifter, emboldened by the isolated location, came too close to the cabin while Sam was away, checking a fence line further up the property. He started shouting, demanding food, his eyes wild. Lily and Ethan ran inside, terrified. Rachel, her heart pounding, remembered Sam's words. She grabbed the shotgun. Her hands shook so badly she could barely lift it. But she did. She pointed it towards the sky, away from the man, and pulled both triggers. The roar was deafening, the recoil slamming her back against the cabin wall. The drifter, startled by the sudden blast, turned and fled. When Sam returned, Rachel was pale but resolute. She told him what happened. He just nodded, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. Good, was all he said. You did good. The notice for the custody hearing arrived a week later, delivered by a weary Sheriff Brody. It was set for the county seat, a 2-day ride away. Rachel stared at the paper, her face drawn. I can't lose them. Sam, you won't, he said. We'll fight him. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. What if the judge sides with him? What then? Will I have to marry again, just to protect them? Find another man to stand as a shield? Her voice broke. I don't want that. Sam, I can't. Sam looked at her, at the strength that had blossomed amidst her fear, the resilience that had seen her through so much. He reached out, his calloused hand gently touching her arm. Rachel, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I ain't Randall, and this ain't about that. He met her gaze directly, his own eyes clear and steady. I'm not proposing marriage. I'm proposing to stand with you, in that courtroom, here, in this cabin, wherever you need me. We'll face him together, as who we are. That's my offer. Her breath hitched. It wasn't a declaration of love in the way the dime novels portrayed it. It was something deeper, quieter, more real, a pledge, a partnership, a promise of steadfastness in a world that had offered her too little of it. She didn't answer with words. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long, long while, Rachel Miller felt the solid ground beneath her feet and the courage to face whatever came next.
What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here.
The days that followed Sam Morgan's quiet pledge were taut with a fragile hope, yet underscored by the gnawing dread of Randall's inevitable return. Spring advanced, unfurling its green banner across the high meadows, but the beauty of it was shadowed by the coming storm. Rachel found herself watching the trail that led from redemption with a familiar anxiety, though now it was tempered by Sam's steadfast presence. He didn't speak much of the looming confrontation, but his calm, his quiet preparation, checking the wagon, ensuring their meager supplies were in order for a potential trip to the county seat, spoke volumes. He was a man bracing for a fight, not with fists or fury, but with a resolve as unyielding as the mountains that ringed their valley. The summons, when it came, was delivered not by Sheriff Brody alone, but by a stern-faced circuit judge named Hargreaves, accompanied by Randall and a slick, city-dressed lawyer named Fletcher, whose polished boots seemed an affront to the dusty ground of Sam's homestead. Judge Hargreaves, A man whose weary eyes had seen too much of human failing unrolled a document with an air of grim duty. Rachel Miller. The judge began, his voice devoid of preliminary softness. This is an order granting temporary and immediate custody of the children Ethan, Lily, and Rose Miller to their biological father, Mr. Randall Miller. Pending a full hearing to determine permanent placement, he looked pointedly at Sam. Mr. Morgan, your interference in this matter, while perhaps well-intentioned, is now at an end. Randall smirked, a look of triumph already settling on his face. His lawyer, Fletcher, stepped forward. We expect full compliance. Your Honor, my client has been grievously separated from his children. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. The words immediate custody struck her like a physical blow. She reached blindly for Sam's arm. The townsfolk, Mrs. Webb, Doc Hadley, Pastor Elias, and a dozen others who had quietly gathered upon seeing the judge's buggy approach, murmured, a low rumble of disapproval. Your Honor, Sam's voice cut through the tension, respectful but firm. These children were abandoned, left in a blizzard. They found sanctuary here, a sanctuary you provided, Mr. Morgan, which is commendable, Fletcher interjected smoothly, but it does not negate Mr. Miller's paternal rights. It was then that Lily, who had been clinging to Rachel's skirt, her small face pale with fear, suddenly stepped forward. Baby Rose, sensing the rising terror, began to wail in Rachel's arms. Lily looked directly at the imposing judge, her lower lip trembling. No, she cried, her child's voice surprisingly clear and carrying. She pointed a small, accusing finger at Randall. He's mean. He made Mama cry. Then she turned, rushing to Sam, burying her face against his leg. Papa Sam keeps us safe. We want to stay with Papa Sam. The outburst, so raw and unexpected, silenced everyone for a beat. Even Judge Hargreaves's stern expression wavered for a moment. Randall flushed angrily. She's been coached. They've turned her against me. Sam gently placed a hand on Lily's trembling shoulder. Your Honor, he said, his gaze steady on the judge. There's an old statute, seldom invoked, but still on the books in this territory, the Homestead Sanctuary Act. It speaks to the protection of children found destitute or abandoned, who are taken in and provided for by another family. It states that the welfare and established bonds of such children must be given paramount consideration, even above prior claims, if those claims were forfeited by neglect or cruelty. Judge Hargreaves raised an eyebrow. Fletcher scoffed. An archaic notion. Mr. Morgan, hardly applicable. It is law? Your Honor, Sam pressed, and I believe it is profoundly applicable. These children have found a home here. They are thriving. To uproot them now, to return them to a man who has already proven his disregard for their well-being. The judge held up a hand. He looked at the tear-streaked face of Lily, still clinging to Sam, at the raw fear in Rachel's eyes, and then at Randall's impatient anger. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man who had seen the spirit of the law broken too many times by its letter. Mr. Fletcher, the judge said slowly, while your client's rights are noted, the child's distress and Mr. Morgan's citation of precedent, give me pause, he sighed, clearly troubled. I will not enforce the immediate transfer of custody today. This court will grant a stay of 3 days. 3 days. Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Miller, for you to prepare a formal response to Mr. Miller's petition. We will convene a full hearing at the county courthouse in Redemption at 10 o'clock. 3 days from now. Present your case then. He fixed Randall with a stern look. And Mr. Miller, any attempt to interfere with the current arrangement before that hearing will be viewed most unfavorably. With that, he turned, and the official party departed, leaving a fragile, temporary reprieve in their wake. The next 3 days were a blur of frantic activity and quiet desperation. Mrs. Webb, Doc Hadley, and Pastor Elias became anchors, helping Sam and Rachel draft statements, gather what little proof they had of Randall's character, mostly the testimony of their own observations since Rachel's arrival. Sam, his face etched with weariness, but his eyes burning with resolve, worked late into the night with Rachel, painstakingly detailing the children's recovery, their newfound happiness, the life they had begun to build. Rachel, drawing on an inner strength she hadn't known, recounted the stark, painful truths of her life with Randall. The fear, the neglect, the abandonment. It was a story she'd never wanted to tell. But for her children, she would face anything. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy, the air thick with unspoken fears. The small courtroom in Redemption was packed. Randall sat with Fletcher, looking confident. Sam and Rachel sat together, a united front, with Mrs. Webb and the pastor seated directly behind them. Fletcher presented Randall's case first, all legalistic arguments and appeals to a father's inherent rights, painting Rachel as unstable, Sam as an interfering interloper. His words were precise, logical, but they lacked a soul, a heart. Then it was Rachel's turn. She didn't have a lawyer. She had only her truth. She stood, her hands clasped before her, her voice low but clear. She spoke of Randall's abandonment, not with rancor, but with a quiet sorrow. She described the fear that had been her constant companion. And then she looked directly at Judge Hargreaves. "Your Honor," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I don't have money or land to offer my children, but I can offer them a life free from fear. I would rather be poor, sir, and live in a one-room cabin where my children are seen for who they are, for the bright, precious souls they are, than live in a mansion where they are merely the shadow of a man who sees them only as possessions." A profound silence filled the courtroom. Then Sam Morgan was called. He stood tall, his weathered face earnest. He spoke not of legal statutes, but of the emptiness of his life after Abigail's passing. The silence of his cabin. "Your Honor," he began, his voice raspy with emotion he rarely showed. "I thought my life was over. Nothing left to give. No one left to give it to. Just waiting out my time." He paused, his gaze finding Rachel, then the empty space where he imagined the children. Then they came. Like a blizzard, they blew into my life, scared and hungry. And they woke something up in me. That old cabin, it ain't just wood and nails no more. It's got laughter in it again. It's got drawings on the floor. Lily, Ethan, little Rose. They gave me a reason to mend fences, to plant a garden, to live again. Sir, not just exist. He looked at the judge, his eyes pleading. They ain't just children I took in. They're the heart that started beatin' in me again. Judge Hargreaves listened, his expression unreadable. He made notes, asked a few clarifying questions. The arguments concluded. The wait for his decision was an agony. Finally, he looked up, his gaze sweeping over Randall, then lingering on Rachel and Sam. The law recognizes the sanctity of parental rights. He began slowly. However, the law also, and more importantly, recognizes the paramount need to protect the welfare and best interests of the child. Mr. Miller, your actions in abandoning your wife and children in perilous circumstances demonstrate a profound disregard for these interests. He continued, Mrs. Miller, Mr. Morgan, the testimony heard today, coupled with the visible well-being and attachment of the children to their current environment, speaks volumes. He paused, and the courtroom held its breath. It is the judgment of this court, Judge Hargreaves declared, his voice firm, that permanent custody of the minor children Ethan, Lily, and Rose Miller is hereby granted to their mother, Rachel Miller. Mr. Miller's petition is denied. Any appeal, he added, looking directly at a stunned and purpling Randall, would, in my opinion, be fruitless. A collective sigh, almost a gasp, swept through Rachel's supporters. Rachel swayed, tears finally breaking free, and Sam's hand found hers. Strong and steady, they had won, not with power, not with force, but with the undeniable truth of a mother's love, a good man's rediscovered heart, and the simple, powerful desire of children to be safe and cherished. The long Montana winter in their souls had finally, truly, begun to thaw. The ride back from redemption to the homestead was quiet. The silence no longer born of tension or unspoken anxieties, but of a deep, bone-weary relief. The children, sensing the shift in the currents that had buffeted their young lives, were subdued, Lily's head resting on Rachel's lap. Ethan occasionally glancing back at Sam, a newfound security in his young eyes. The weight of the court's decision, the finality of Randall's defeat, settled over them like a warm blanket. That evening, after the children were asleep, their peaceful breathing a gentle rhythm in the small cabin, Rachel approached Sam as he sat by the hearth, staring into the embers. In her palm, she held a small, intricately carved wooden ring, a tiny, perfect band of polished pine. He'd whittled one quiet afternoon, weeks ago, during the uncertain lull before Randall's full fury had descended. He'd left it on the windowsill, an unspoken offering. She had picked it up then, her fingers tracing its smooth surface, and tucked it away, unsure of what it meant, unsure of what she could accept. Now, she held it out to him. The firelight caught the warm tones of the wood. "Sam," she began, her voice soft but steady, "when you first offered for us to stay, I was grateful for the shelter, for the safety." Her gaze met his, clear and unwavering. "But things are different now. Randall, he's no longer a shadow we have to hide from." She gently placed the ring back in his calloused, weathered hand. "I want to stay, Sam, not because I'm afraid, or because I need a roof or a protector." A small, genuine smile touched her lips, the first truly untroubled smile he'd seen from her. "I want to stay because this place, with you, with the children, this feels like home, the only real home I've known in a very long time. If you'll still have us, knowing it's a choice, not a necessity." Sam looked down at the ring in his palm, then up at Rachel. Her eyes, once haunted by fear, now held a quiet strength, a gentle hope. He didn't have grand words. He never had. He simply took her hand, the one that wasn't holding the ring, and closed his own around it, enclosing the small wooden circle between their palms. "Reckon this cabin's seen its share of lonely days." "Rachel," he said, his voice a low rumble, "be good to have it no different." It was his way of saying everything. And so, life in the small cabin on the Montana frontier settled into a news, more deeply rooted rhythm. The sharp edges of their shared anxieties began to soften, worn smooth by the daily currents of a life lived together. The children, no longer looking over their shoulders, blossomed. Ethan became Sam's earnest apprentice, his small hands learning the heft of the axe under careful supervision, the feel of wood grain, the patience of mending a fence. Lily, her laughter echoing through the aspen grove, filled pages of an old ledger with vibrant drawings of their life. The cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a lopsided but recognizable portrait of Sam teaching Ethan to fish, and a smiling stick figure of her mother, baking, Rachel, moving with a newfound lightness, truly made the cabin her own. The scent of yeast and baking bread became a constant, mingling with the aroma of herbs she hung to dry from the rafters. She mended Sam's worn shirts with neat, almost invisible stitches, and sometimes, on cooler mornings, Sam would find her wearing one of his old, faded flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek. It was a sight that warmed him in a way the sun no longer could. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned to gold and flame, Ethan and Lily were out by the small coop Sam had helped them build, their bright voices raised in a familiar, good-natured squabble over whose turn it was to scatter the chicken feed. Inside, Rose, now steady on her feet, toddled over to a new doll Sam had carved for her, a sweet-faced figure with yarn hair. She hugged it tightly. "Abby," she declared with solemn satisfaction. Patting its head, Rachel, hearing it, caught Sam's eye. Abigail, his Abigail. A pang, sharp and sweet, went through him. His past wasn't being erased. It was being gently woven into the fabric of this news, unexpected present. That night, after the children were tucked into their beds, their dreams untroubled, Sam did something he hadn't done in years. From the dusty corner of the loft, he brought down a half-finished cradle. He'd started it that first winter after Abigail had passed. A desperate, futile attempt to carve away the silence, to hold on to a future that had vanished. It was beautifully made, of dark, rich walnut, but he'd never completed it. The task too painful, the purpose lost. He carried it down and, with a quiet deliberateness, placed it near the hearth, in the warm glow of the fire. It looked right, as if it had always been meant for this spot, for this time. Rachel watched him, her heart full. "It's beautiful, Sam," he nodded, running a hand over the smooth, unfinished wood. Never quite knew what to do with it, till now. Later, as a chill wind whispered outside, a prelude to the coming winter, Rachel sat beside him, mending a small tear in Ethan's trousers. "Sometimes," she confessed, her voice low, "even now, I'm still afraid that this is too good, that something will happen." Sam reached over and covered her hand with his, stilling her needle. "Fear ain't a stranger to anyone who's lived a life, Rachel," he said, his gaze gentle. "But it ain't all you have anymore. Look around. This," he gestured to the quiet cabin, the sleeping children, the warmth between them. "This is real too. Their love, if that's what this deep, quiet current between them was to be called, wasn't built on fervent declarations or breathless promises. It was forged in the small, everyday acts of shared living. It was in the way Sam's hand would instinctively find the small of her back as they passed in the narrow space between the table and the stove. It was in the way Rachel knew just how he liked his coffee, strong and black. It was in them taking turns sitting up through the night when Lily came down with a fever. Their whispered conversations a counterpoint to the child's restless breathing. It was Sam patiently teaching Ethan to hold a whittling knife, Rachel humming an old lullaby as she reknitted the heel of a worn sock. Winter eventually returned, draping the Montana landscape in its familiar white mantle. Blizzards would still howl, shaking the sturdy log walls of the cabin. But this time, when the snows came, they found Sam Morgan and Rachel Miller not as solitary souls, nor as strangers thrown together by desperation and circumstance. They sat together by the fire, the cradle nearby, the sounds of their children sleeping peacefully in the next room. They were a family, not born of blood in the usual way, but chosen, steadfast. Piece by precious piece, they had faced the storms, both outside and within, and they had chosen to stay. Together, home. The last snows of that long winter had finally retreated, surrendering the land to a vibrant spring. From the cabin door, Sam watched Ethan, now taller and surer of foot, helping Rachel plant rows of new seeds in the expanded garden. Lily chased butterflies near the creek, her laughter, light as thistledown, drifting on the warm breeze. Rose, babbling contentedly, sat at Sam's feet, trying to fit a misshapen wooden block into a perfectly round hole he'd carved. Rachel straightened, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, and her eyes met Sam's across the sun-dappled yard. A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that held no shadows of the past, only the quiet strength of the present, and a gentle welcome for whatever the seasons ahead might bring. Sam felt an answering warmth spread through his chest, familiar now, and deeply cherished. He picked up a piece of pine and his whittling knife, the wood smooth and promising in his grip. The children would need new toys. The cabin would always need mending. And the land, it would always ask for their care. The days ahead stretched out, unwritten, holding the simple promise of shared sunrises and the comfort of the fire at night. He didn't know what all those days would hold. No man ever did. But as he looked at Rachel, her gaze steady on his, he knew they would meet them together. And for now, that was everything.
What did you think of today's story? If it made your day, drop a good in the comments. If it didn't hit the mark, just type 1. Got your own thoughts? I'd love to hear them below. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much for being here.